Hi, my friends. Welcome to Inside the Minds of Authors. I'm DC Gomez, your host, and also an indie author. I'm thrilled you're joining me today for another fun interview with a passionate author. We're going to kick off this show with an exciting reading, so let's get started.
My name is Iona Mckenzie, and I'm excited to be introducing you to my latest novel entitled The Ripening, A Canadian Girl Grows Up. A little bit about the book. The main character in this novel, Tilly, was actually a character in my last novel, but she was much older in my last novel. She was approaching her 60s, and this then is an early version of Tilly. And this portion that I'm going to read here from the San Francisco Bay Area, and she had moved to San Francisco with her friend Gwen, and Tilly has never known her dad. She was illegitimate, and so part of her search in the novel is for this father that she's never known. So here goes. One night, Tilly and Gwen had visited a neighborhood bar and picked up a couple of guys. The four of them decided to visit a nearby spiritualist church. Tilly had heard of weird things happening there, and they all thought it would be good for laughs. The minister called up people from the congregation's past, living or dead. Tilly was hoping to learn something about her real dad. He could be anywhere, maybe even in Frisco. The four of them joined the long line filing into the building for the evening service. A donation basket sat on a table in front of a woman who was greeting everyone. Some people put checks into it, others bills. Tilly looked around at the notices on the bulletin board as she passed by, pretending she didn't see the basket or the woman. She needed her money more than they did. Inside, an usher handed each of them a piece of paper and a pencil, pointing to seats on one side of the pulpit that gave them a side view of the minister. A little tipsy, the four giggled nervously, stumbling over people's feet on the way to their seats in the wooden pews. The place smelled like dust. They were the youngest there. Most were middle-aged or older. Some knew each other and chattered away until a tall, stout woman wearing a white lace dress climbed the platform. Her short, permed, steel gray hair tinted blue, she stood behind the podium and looked around the room. Then she spoke with a strong Scottish accent. We're all gathered here this evening to share together in the spirit world and the divine presence among us. Let us pray. Our Creator, we place ourselves in your hands from whatever religious background we come from to be melted down and made into new beings. We welcome your spirit tonight. Help us to connect with our loved ones who've gone on to be with you or to answer any questions residing in our hearts. Amen. Tilly, Gwen, and the guys glanced at each other, stifling giggles. And the minister again speaks, if you're a first-time visitor, and she looks right at Tilly, we'll be sending around a basket soon. Write your question on the paper the usher gave you and put it in the basket. If it's a deceased person you want to ask a question of, give the person's full name. If you don't have a loved one you want to contact, just write your question. Don't give your actual name, just an initial or a nickname if you like. I'll look at all your inquiries and let the spirits speak through me, God willing. Tilly stared at her piece of paper, afraid to put the question in writing, not sure she really wanted an answer. She looked at Gwen, then at the guys. Gwen's date, Malcolm, and Tilly's date, Jerome, was Malcolm's friend. They were all scribbling away. She looked back at her sheet. Before she could chicken out, she wrote, "Where is my father? What can you tell me about him?" After signing it, Athena, she folded the paper several times before dropping it in the basket when it passed. She suddenly felt sober, cold sober. The baskets quickly made it around the room, and the ushers carried them up to the minister. She stood, opening her arms wide and throwing back her head. Almighty Creator, fill our minds with pure thoughts and our hearts with sincere feelings, so we can all participate in bringing these concerns to the light of your wisdom. Then she looked at everyone again and gave instructions. When your answer comes through me, don't leave. Please sit quietly till the end of the service. We need your presence to help the spirits do their work. Soothed by the minister's Scottish brogue, Tilly was reminded of her mom and grandpa's accent. She might not have a father she could call on, but she did have roots somewhere. The minister's voice washed over her like water in a brook, lightly touching Tilly's body. It went on and on. Then she said, "This message is for Athena. The subject of your inquiry is married and currently has 2 children." Married? 2 children? "You'll find your father in Calgary." And here Tilly responds, in Calgary? He'd been there all the time and he'd never looked up his daughter. Tilly had pictured him on the road, his life filled with adventures, father and daughter, 2 chips off the old block. But married in Calgary? She closed her eyes and pretended she was sleeping.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Inside the Minds of Authors. Today we have the fabulous Miss Lily. Hello, madam. How are you?
Hi there. How are you?
I am wonderful. Welcome. I'm so excited you're joining us.
Thank you.
Are you ready to get started?
I'm ready. If you're ready, I'm ready.
Let's do this. I am so curious about this book. Tell us, where did this idea come from and what is it about? Give us the whole picture of this book.
Well, this is one of my novels that actually the seeds of the characters are much closer to me than in my other novels. My other novels, the characters and what happens to them really don't have much autobiographical significance. This one has more. Like Tilly, I spent some time on a farm in Alberta, Canada, when I was a little girl. My mother had married a man, and it was a kind of a vexed relationship. He was someone that Tilly in the novel was afraid of because he'd be nice to her a lot of the time, but also he had a real bad temper and she never knew when he was going to flare up and maybe even hit her. The farm was a kind of a paradise for her because she was able to interact with all of the animals, and she'd help raise, the baby pigs and baby sheep. This was a world, even though the stepfather wasn't a terrific addition to her life, it's still the world that he introduced her to was a paradise. But then he had really severe asthma. He was allergic to a lot of the things that the farm produced. So they ended up having to move back to Calgary. And she then had to adjust. Her mother often said to her, when she might complain, when Tilly might complain about her circumstances, well, you just have to cope. You just have to learn how to cope. And so Tilly learned how to cope. When they first moved back to the city, they ended up living in a dilapidated hotel in the east end of town, which was not a very great place for a little girl to be because there were, prostitutes hanging out there and cowboys passing through the town, to go to the rodeo and so on. And she was fascinated, curious little girl. She was fascinated with all that she saw in that world.
So you mentioned how she's one of the characters from one of your previous book. What made you decide to do a story on her specifically instead of anybody else?
Well, because my publisher, Pinnell Publishing, offered me a contract, a 3-book contract, and they had published my first novel, Fling. Free Fall, A Divine Comedy is the second novel. And so the third novel, they thought it would be good to continue to see more of Tilly from Free Fall. So that was really what prompted me to do that.
If people were looking to follow the series, they don't actually have to read Free Fall first because they can read Tilly's story first.
Absolutely. It stands alone. Yes. But the Tilly in Free Fall is really wacky installation artist. So it's interesting. If you have read Free Fall, it'd be interesting for someone to then read this novel to see Tilly's roots, how she ended up becoming an artist.
That's a good transition for anybody who wants to see that. What genre would you put this book in?
Well, this one would be adult, young adult, new adult.
That's usually fun for our readers to kind of figure out where they wanted to go from the story. So especially if they like new adult novels, this is a great one to pick up and kind of follow that journey along. I'll probably
Yeah.
read this one and then go into free fall.
Yes, it's a coming of age narrative. And by the end of the novel, we see some light, some hope for Tilly.
It's always exciting. We want our main characters to have some growth and progress, but also to have a hopefully happily ever after every once in a while. Switching a little bit away from your book and more into you, how long have you been writing for?
Well, when I was probably about 13, I had started a diary. I created my own symbols so that anyone who might read it wouldn't be able to understand what I was saying. I don't know whatever happened to that diary, but it was my first impulse to write what was going on inside me and to, capture it on paper. My mid-20s, I went through a deep depression. And part of what I did to come out of that, in addition to therapy, was I started keeping a journal. And that's been a lifelong thing for me. Now I have tons of journals and continue to, every day write my dreams and reflections and so on. But in terms of really approaching writing as my vocation, it was in my early 30s that I started taking creative writing classes, and I ended up with a BA in English with an emphasis in creative writing in my early 30s. And then from there, I went on and I thought, well, if I'm going to be a writer, I need to have a broader, deeper foundation in the humanities. So I then went on and took a master's degree in the humanities, which gave me that depth and breadth that I wanted. And then I went on and took another master's degree, again in English with an emphasis on creative writing. And I started out mainly as a poet. Poetry collection, All This, was published in 2011. But I realized that poetry, not that many people read poetry. And if I wanted to get some readers, I needed to write fiction. So that's when I started to write. First, I started with short fiction, and I don't know where I got the nerve to try to write a novel because, yeah, it's a slog. It takes tremendous persistence and determination to complete a novel. All of these novels took years to write. The first one that I published was Fling, and each one has its own themes, its own direction. They're all totally different. So I have found that instead of trying to work through agents, it's been easier for me to get response from small presses. And Pinnell Publishing, a small press, have published now, it'll be, as I've already said, my third novel with them. And then the other novel, Curva Pelagrosa, was also with a small press, Regal House Publishing. And my poetry collection, All This, came out with Little Red Tree Publishing. And then I also have published a poetry chapbook, No More Kings, that Prolific Press published. For those writers who are trying to go the traditional route, agents and big houses and so on, it's certainly worth, trying. But I recommend, if they're not succeeding, they probably will do better if they go to small presses.
I like that, especially for people who are looking for a traditional route. Most people think they have to go to the top four. You can do a small
That's
publisher
right.
that can give you the same resources and probably more confidence starting out. So that's awesome. What are some of the lessons you have learned in your journey? Because you have the academia side of the house, you got the publishing side. What have you learned in this journey?
Well, I've learned that if you're really serious about writing, it's not unlike getting married, where you're going to run into lots of ups and downs in the process. And you have to be ready for that. And you have to be ready to stick it out through the days when the writing isn't coming, where your imagination seems to have taken a vacation, where whatever is going on in your life interferes. And you simply have to just keep putting one foot in front of the other and staying with it. until it begins to, take off again. So persistence, perseverance, commitment, those I think are the main words that I would use for trying to succeed in this world. And don't expect to make a ton of money. I mean, it's my understanding that something like 5% of all writers, only 5% are able to support themselves from their writing. And those are the big names, that we're familiar with, the Jonathan Franzen, the Isabel Allende,
It's also good to go into it and have realistic expectations of what you want in your career and what you're aiming for.
Yes, exactly.
What are you working on now? Because you have so much going on, so many different things. What do you have in the works?
Well, I teach as well, and that's how I've earned a living over the years, teaching writing. And I used to teach freshman, sophomore, University of San Francisco and other Bay Area colleges. But now I teach older adults at the University of San Francisco's Fromm Institute for Lifelong Learning. And one of the things that they love to work on is their memoirs, and teaching them how to write their memoirs has been really inspiring for me, not just their stories, which are tremendous, tremendous stories, but the community that forms around them, writing these things and sharing them with each other. So I have written, some short memoirs. I guess I've written a hybrid memoir that's out looking for a publisher. It's called Dreaming Myself into Old Age, One Woman's Search for Meaning. And it's a combination of, reflection and exploring how dreams have been such a major presence in my life, all my life, and especially now in old age too, and how they've contributed as well to my work as a writer. But the memoir also includes, some of my poems and critical essays and different things. So it is a hybrid, but I'd really like to be doing more memoir writing. I love doing critical writing. I love to read, especially poetry, and analyze it. So there are lots of things I'd love to be doing right now. And poetry is just my first love. And I have another poetry collection that's out looking for a publisher too. It's called California Dreaming. I just don't have enough time in my days. I also do some painting. The cover of my poetry collection, all this, the painting is one that I did. So I'd love to be doing more of that. Too much to do and not enough time.
Starting to see that. That is absolutely amazing. But it has been so much fun having you. You have so much wealth of information that I'm just like, wow. Before you leave us, where can our listeners find you?
Yeah, well, very easy to find me. I'm Lily Iona Mckenzie, and I'll spell that. It's LILIONAMACKENzie.com. Very easy. And so that's my blog, and all of my books are there. My work as a tutor and writing coach, editor is there, information about that. Everything is there. My whole life.
Awesome. One location, everybody can find everything they need to do. It's perfect. But before we go, we're going to jump into our lightning round. Easy peasy. Don't think too much about these. Let's see how you do. Beach or lake?
Beach.
Okay.
I like to be near the ocean. Yeah.
Breakfast or dinner?
Oh, dinner.
Nice.
Definitely dinner.
Pepsi or Coke?
Neither.
Okay. Not a bad thing. Cats or dogs?
Oh, cats. No question.
Nice. And here's our last one. This is a little different. If you had a fruit that could define your personality, what would it be?
Mango.
Really? Why?
Well, because it's firm and it's, clearly shaped, but it also, when it's ripe, there's also a nice softness in the center. And I think I can come across as maybe more formal and distant in person until people get to know me, but I'm really soft inside. That's what I'm trying to say.
That is beautiful. Madame, it has been a pleasure. We are so happy you joined us. Do you have any closing remarks for us?
Well, I just hope that for those who are listening, who are writers, I hope that they'll continue to pursue their dreams as writers and to read widely. That's really one of the major things that promising writers have to do, is just to read a lot and learn from what other writers have done.
Oh, madam, that is an amazing advice. Thank you. Thank you to our listeners. Go check out Ms. Lily, check out her website and her blog. Thank you so much for joining us. We'll be back again next week with another exciting author. Remember, if you're interested in supporting the podcast, you want to see the creation, more authors joining us, join the Patreon community, patreon.com/author DC Gomez. Thank you, everyone. Bye.